What's up, folks? This is Justin from Books, Bricks, and Boards. As you've heard me discuss a couple of times on the channel, I am getting towards the end of our Abomination Vaults Pathfinder 2e campaign, and with that, I'm getting ready to start a Savage Pathfinder campaign. I haven't decided exactly where that is going to be or what it's going to entail, other than it is going to be fantasy and it's going to use the Savage Pathfinder rules. Recently, I had a discussion with one of my players who really wants to play in the Forgotten Realms, and so that's a very good possibility. Whenever I was talking to him about this, he was really concerned about the amount of work that it would take to utilize Realms material in a different setting. This kind of surprised me because really what you want to take from the realms is the background information, not necessarily the mechanics. So today I am going to share some of the ways that I utilize the classic material in my more modern games. And that's why I'm calling this RPG 101, Converting the Classics. Without any further ado, let's get into it. Why to convert the classics? You may find yourself wondering, why would you want to use all of these materials when there's so much available already for the system that I'm getting ready to start? There is a lot of material available for Savage Worlds, but the fact of the matter is, D&D's been around since the 70s, and the Forgotten Realms has been around for most of the 80s and beyond. And there's a lot of great material out there. And even though the material is old to me and some of us that are in my age bracket,
get off my lawn,
it's brand new to a lot of our players. They weren't around, they weren't in the RP scene whenever this material was released, and it's even a completely different animal than the Forgotten Realms material that's been released recently. Also, the cost of some of the older materials, if you're willing to get the PDFs or the reprints on DriveThruRPG, it's very affordable. You can find some of the books like Volo's Guide to Waterdeep for 20 bucks, and it has such a depth of information that's not in most material released today. This allows for a change of pace. The style of writing and world building is just vastly different today than it was back in the 80s and earlier. By tapping into some of this older material, you can create a game that is completely fresh for your group. What sources should you use for inspiration? There's a lot of different places you can look to convert classics to a modern game. You could look at older games like TSR-era modules and setting books. You can look at fiction, such as the Appendix N works, Robert E. Howard, J.R.R. Tolkien, or H.P. Lovecraft. You could look at other forms of media, like movies. You could easily play a game set in the world of Willow, or Big Trouble in Little China, Conan the Barbarian. You can look in comics, you can look in graphic novels. There is so much information available that you might be very intimately familiar with, but could be completely new to your players. As a young D&D player, I remember being introduced to all sorts of material that I thought was just brand new, created by my DM, and only years later did I figure out that he'd been stealing ideas from all sorts of fiction. And it only made it all the better when I found this out, because he cleverly implemented it into his own world, and it made it feel new and fresh to me, like I was exploring a brand new world that nobody had ever seen. And that's the impact that you can create by converting these classics. How do you go about converting material? So when you have material that may have been created in the 80s or even earlier, how do you go about converting that to something that was designed with a much more modern focus? Well, there's a lot of ways that you can do that. You can actually take comps from the newer system and just reskin them. An orc could easily be a soldier or grunt in an army. A goblin could be a weaker scout. By taking the statistics and just renaming the monster, you have what you know to be an effective and balanced enemy to throw at your players, and with a little reflavoring, they'll be none the wiser that it is actually just the same old orc they've always fought. You can also steal storylines. So if you like a particular tale from Solomon Kane, you could easily take that story and apply it to a world that you're playing in, and using the same beats but more appropriate players for your setting, you can actually steal a storyline nearly whole cloth. You can genre shift, just like the filmmakers do. Seven Samurai was actually the basis for the Magnificent Seven, as Yojimbo was the basis for A Fistful of Dollars. In the same way, you could take a sci-fi themed adventure or western themed adventure and easily make that into a fantasy adventure, or vice versa. One of the most fun ways to do this is to combine elements from different sources. Think like Game of Death by Bruce Lee. He had a very grand idea for this movie, and unfortunately, because of his untimely passing, they couldn't fulfill the vision that Bruce Lee had for the movie. So they took numerous different ideas and jammed them together to create a passable story that included the footage that was gathered. You can easily take bits and pieces from different adventures across different genres and different source materials and combine those different story beats to create something wholly new of your own that your players will have never experienced before. Where are you going to place this material? You can use a setting whole cloth. You can grab a novel that you've enjoyed and play directly in the setting of that novel. You could grab an old box set by TSR and use that in any setting that you want with minimal adjustments. Or you could drop it in the middle of your homebrew campaign. This Hot Springs Island map could easily be another island next to my Isle of Avalonia, which is actually how I designed Isle of Avalonia to work, with Hot Springs Island as an additional island that was close by. You could put the setting just off camera, much like TSR did with Karatur being just to the east of the known Forgotten Realms. Or you could even create a single world that accommodates several different settings and create your own kitchen sink campaign, a la Rifts. Whatever you do, there's no wrong answer, as long as it's what works for you and your group. Who are your players going to be? You can let them be bog standard characters from the system that you're using. If you're playing in Castles and Crusades, they could easily just be fighters, mages, thieves, and wizards in a world of science fiction. It's the fish out of water story. Or you could reskin existing character options. This is something that Scarlet Heroes does quite well. They didn't include separate classes to be samurai or ninja because those are just different cultures' takes on these standard fighters and thieves. So reskinning existing hero archetypes is perfectly acceptable to go ahead and give the feeling of this other setting to your game. You can also modify or tweak to capture flavor. This is very common with ancestral options in various different games. If you have a hill dwarf or a mountain dwarf, they're still a dwarf. It's just they have a little minor tweak here or there in terms of their bonuses to give them a little bit of a mechanical benefit to help flavor the character. Aside from that, you can also create your own. Savage Worlds and Cypher System are excellent for this because they have built-in tools to design. But many different systems will give you some basic ideas on how to incorporate your own classes and races into their games. Whatever you do, as long as your players are enjoying it and they're having fun, you're doing it right. When should you start converting your own classics? Do it now. Don't wait. Don't think that you're going to mystically be better at this skill set without practicing it. Make some mistakes. Just make sure your players are on board and that They'll cut you a little slack whenever things don't work out quite as planned. And a lot of times those mistakes end up being the most fun part of the campaign. You stumble onto some really interesting ideas by making some mistakes and owning them. There's lots of material out there that's ripe for the picking. Grab your favorite movie, your favorite novel, or your favorite comic book and start stealing ideas. Don't get into the weeds. Don't worry about the details or the mechanical balance. We as gamers seem to think that these game designers have these greatly balanced concepts all throughout their game and that everything that we do to change them are going to break them. That's simply not true. Games shouldn't necessarily be balanced because life's not balanced and role-playing games are about simulating lives. So don't worry about getting it perfect. Just make it fun. Lastly, share your results with others so that they can learn and grow from your own experiences and you can do the same with theirs. So that's my video on converting the classics. Hopefully I've inspired you to get out there and steal some ideas from some of the greats that came before us. And a little update on the channel. Over the next few weeks, I'm going to be concentrating mainly on talking about some of the games that I have not talked about on this channel much, because I'm gearing up for my trip to GaryCon, and I have lots of new stuff that I need to get off my chest and talk about before I get to the big con. So, I'm going to be talking about Legacy of Cthulhu, Traveler, Crown and Skull, Shadow Dark, and many other RPGs between now and GaryCon. And all throughout that, I'm also going to be preparing for my new Savage Worlds Savage Pathfinder campaign. And remember, my inspiration for potentially moving to Forgotten Realms with my Pathfinder campaign came out of a simple conversation where one of my players noted that he really liked my maps on my wall and he wishes that we could use those in gameplay. Inspiration can come from many sources, but the best place is from the players that play at your table. With that said, this has been Justin from Books, Bricks, and Boards. If you enjoyed the content, please be sure to like, share, and subscribe. Until next time, good gaming, and God bless.